In the brutal expanse of the 1874 Arizona Territory, a woman's worth was measured by her dowry and her delicate face. Henrietta Miller had neither. Traded to a rugged Apache mountain man for a handful of winter pelts, she expected death. Instead, she found an untamed, earth-shattering love. The summer of 1874 was unforgiving in the Gila River Valley. The sun beat down on the parched earth, baking the clay until it cracked like old leather. At the edge of the settlement, isolated by both geography and reputation, stood the homestead of Josiah Miller. Josiah was a bitter, hard-drinking man who had dragged his family west seeking gold only to find dirt disease and insurmountable debt. His eldest daughter, Henrietta, known as Hattie to the few who bothered to speak to her, bore the brunt of his resentment. Hattie was 24, an age considered perilously past a woman's prime in the frontier. But it wasn't just her age that made her unmarriageable in the eyes of the townsfolk of Fort Thomas. It was her appearance. When she was 12, a devastating outbreak of smallpox had swept through the territory, taking her mother and leaving Hattie's face deeply pitted and scarred, while her younger sister Abigail had blossomed into a fragile porcelain-skinned beauty and was quickly married off to a prosperous mercantile owner in Tucson. Hattie was left behind. She was built like the land she worked, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands heavily calloused from chopping wood, mending fences, and wrestling mules. Her father never let her forget her lack of traditional beauty. A face that had curdled fresh milk, he would mutter into his whiskey cup, staring at her with unabashed disgust as she served him his evening stew. To Josiah, Hattie was not a daughter. She was an unpaid, unlovely farmhand, a constant reminder of his failures. The crisis that would forever alter Hattie's life arrived on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. Josiah was drowning in debt, owing over $300 to Jedediah Wilkes, a ruthless land baron who was systematically buying up every failing ranch in the valley. Wilkes had given Josiah an ultimatum: pay the debt by sundown, or surrender the deed to the land. Josiah had nothing left to sell. His cattle were rib-thin, his crops withered. As the sun began to dip toward the jagged teeth of the Dragoon Mountains, a solitary figure rode into the dusty yard. It was a man the locals whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. His Apache name was Tohon, meaning cougar, but the white trappers and settlers simply called him Cole. He was a mountain man, a half Chiricahua Apache, who lived high in the rugged sanctuary of the Mogollon Rim. Cole walked between two worlds, but belonged to neither. Standing well over 6 feet, he was a mountain of a man, clad in worn buckskin and a heavy bear skin draped over his saddle. His hair was long and black, tied back with a leather thong, and his eyes were the color of dark flint. He carried a heavy Sharps buffalo rifle and a reputation that made men step off the wooden sidewalks when he came into town to trade. Cole had come to Josiah's ranch, seeking to trade prime beaver and wolf pelts for winter supplies, flour salt, and black powder. Josiah, desperate and cornered by his impending ruin, looked at the pile of thick, luxurious furs. They were worth a fortune back east, more than enough to pay off Wilkes and buy him another year of whiskey and survival. "I ain't got the supplies you want, Injun." Josiah spat, his eyes glued greedily to the furs. "But I need them pelts. I'll make you a trade." Cole sat perfectly still on his massive roan, gelding his expression unreadable. "What do you have, Miller?" His voice was deep, resonant, and carried the quiet danger of a rock slide waiting to happen. Josiah's eyes darted toward the porch, where Hattie was violently scrubbing a cast-iron pot, her face hidden behind strings of sweat-dampened brown hair. "I'll give you the girl," Josiah said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial grit. Hattie froze. The rough hemp of the scrub brush slipped from her fingers, clattering into the tin basin. She slowly turned her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Surely she had misheard. "She's ugly as sin, I won't lie to you," Josiah continued, stepping closer to Cole's horse, gesturing toward his own daughter as if she were a defective mule. Pox ruined her face. "But she's built like a draft horse. She can haul water skin, a buck chop wood, and she don't complain. You live up in the ice and rocks. You need a squaw to keep your fire lit and haul your meat. Take her. Leave the pelts." A suffocating silence fell over the yard. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Hattie stared at her father, a sickening wave of betrayal and humiliation washing over her. She knew he did not love her, but to be bartered away like livestock to a wild man of the mountains, she braced herself for the mountain man's rejection, for the inevitable cruel laugh at the prospect of taking such an ugly woman. Instead, Cole turned his intense dark eyes toward the porch. He looked at Hattie. He did not look at her scars. His gaze traveled over her strong shoulders, the defiant tilt of her chin, and the desperate, terrified fire burning in her hazel eyes. He saw a survivor. He saw a woman who had endured a lifetime of cruelty without breaking. After a long, agonizing moment, Cole dismounted. He unslung the bundle of heavy pelts from his saddle and tossed them into the dust at Josiah's feet. "Tell her to get her things." Cole said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Josiah barked a laugh, quickly, scooping up the furs before the mountain man could change his mind. "You heard him, Hattie. Get your sack. You belong to the savage now." Hattie's legs felt like lead. She walked into the dark, stifling cabin, mechanically packing her few belongings into a canvas sack, a spare cotton dress, a heavy wool shawl her mother had knitted a bone comb, and a small worn Bible. When she stepped back out into the blinding sunlight, Josiah was already gone, having rushed off to find Wilkes. She walked toward the towering mountain man, her head bowed, expecting a rough hand to grab her hair or a rope to be tied around her wrists. Instead, Cole silently reached out and took the heavy canvas sack from her hands. He effortlessly tied it behind his saddle. He then offered her a hand up. Hattie hesitated, looking at his calloused, scarred hand. With a trembling breath, she took it. His grip was remarkably gentle. As she settled onto the back of the roan sitting behind him, she looked back at the dilapidated ranch one last time. She was riding into the unforgiving wilderness with a man who was rumored to scalp his enemies. She fully believed she would not survive the week. They rode in silence for hours, leaving the sweltering heat of the valley behind as they began the steep, treacherous ascent toward the Mogollon Rim. The terrain shifted from brittle scrub brush and cacti to towering ponderosa pines and cool, shadowy canyons. The air grew thin and bitingly crisp. Hattie clung to the back of Cole's saddle, keeping her distance, terrified that if she touched him, he would strike her. Her mind raced with dark, terrifying scenarios. What did a wild mountain man want with a woman her own father deemed worthless? She assumed she was being taken to his camp, to be a slave, to be beaten, starved, and eventually worked to death in the harsh winter snows. As twilight bled over the mountains, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and gold, Cole finally pulled the horse to a halt in a secluded, sheltered grove near a babbling alpine creek. He dismounted quietly and turned to her. Hattie flinched instinctively, raising a hand to protect her scarred face. Cole stopped, his brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of something resembling pain crossing his stoic features. He slowly lowered his hands, taking a deliberate step back to give her space. "Get down," he said softly. Hattie slid from the horse, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. She immediately moved to begin gathering firewood, eager to prove her usefulness, terrified of the consequences if she did not work. "Stop!" Cole's voice cut through the quiet air. Hattie froze, dropping a dry branch. She turned, expecting a blow. Instead, Cole walked past her, unhooking a leather canteen from his saddle. He uncorked it and handed it to her. "Drink, you are tired." Hattie stared at the canteen, then at him. In 24 years, her father had never once offered her water before taking his own fill. She took it hesitantly and drank the ice-cold mountain water, watching him carefully. Cole did not order her to build the fire or tend the horse. He did it himself, moving with a quiet, efficient grace that mesmerized her. Within minutes, a warm, crackling fire was pushing back the mountain chill. He handed her a strip of dried venison and motioned for her to sit on a thick buffalo robe he had laid out near the warmth. Why did you trade for me?" Hattie finally whispered, her voice cracking, breaking the silence of the night. "You could have had any woman in town for those pelts, a pretty one." Cole sat across the fire, feeding a branch into the flames. The firelight danced across his rugged face, highlighting the high cheekbones of his Apache heritage and the thick beard of a mountain man. "The men in the valley." Cole began his voice a low rumble. "They look at the surface of the river. They see the reflection. They do not see the current underneath." He locked his dark eyes onto hers. "Your father is a blind man, Henrietta. He looks at a strong, resilient pine tree and is angry that it is not a fragile desert flower." Hattie's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever called her Henrietta with such respect. No one had ever spoken of her strength as a virtue rather than a beastly utility. "I do not need a fragile flower." Cole continued, his gaze unwavering. "Winter in the high country is merciless. It breaks weak things. I watched you in that yard. I saw the way you held your head. I saw a woman who has survived a great war in her own home. I traded for you because I saw a warrior." A single tear spilled over Hattie's lower lid, tracing a path down her scarred cheek. She hurriedly wiped it away, ashamed. But as she laid down on the buffalo robe that night, wrapped in the heavy warmth of the fur, the knot of terror in her chest began to loosen, replaced by a strange, fragile blossom of hope. The true test of their bond came 3 days later, as they neared Cole's isolated cabin. The weather turned violently, as it often did in the high country. A torrential downpour caught them on the edge of a deep, narrow gorge. The river below had swelled into a raging, muddy torrent, tearing trees from its banks. The only way across was a narrow, slippery wooden bridge constructed of felled logs, lashed together with thick rope. Cole dismounted, leading the panicked roan across the treacherous span. Hattie followed closely behind. They were halfway across when a massive, uprooted spruce trunk came hurtling down the rapids. With a deafening crack, the trunk smashed into the bridge's supporting pillars. The logs groaned and buckled beneath them. The bridge violently tilted. Cole lost his footing, slipping on the slick bark. He fell hard, sliding toward the edge, his leg plunging through a gap in the logs. The terrified horse reared, breaking free of Cole's grip and bolting to the far side. Cole was left dangling the raging river, snapping at his boots, struggling to pull himself up with arms slick with freezing rain and mud. Hattie didn't scream. She didn't freeze. The broad shoulders and powerful hands her father had so violently despised sprang into action. She dropped flat onto the trembling logs, crawling through the blinding rain to where Cole was hanging. "Grab my arms." Hattie roared over the sound of the thunder. Cole looked up, shocked, to see her reaching down for him, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated determination. He reached up, grasping her wrists. Hattie braced her boots against a protruding knot in the wood. She closed her eyes, digging deep into the well of physical strength she had built over years of grueling labor. With a guttural cry, she pulled. Her muscles burned, her joints popped, but she did not let go. Inch by agonizing inch, she hauled the massive mountain man upward until he could throw his upper body over the logs. Together they scrambled to the muddy bank, just as the ropes gave way, and the bridge shattered behind them, swept away by the furious tide. They collapsed on the cold mud, gasping for breath, the freezing rain pelting their bodies. Cole pushed himself up onto his knees. He looked back at the roaring gorge, then turned to look at Hattie. She was covered in mud, her hair plastered to her scarred face, her hands bleeding from the splinters. She had never looked less like a lady. To Cole, she had never looked more beautiful. He crawled over to her, reaching out a large, trembling hand. For the first time, he touched her face, gently wiping a streak of mud from her cheek, his thumb grazing her pox scars with profound reverence. "You saved my life," he whispered, the stoicism finally melting from his voice, revealing a raw, intense emotion. "My life belongs to you now, Henrietta." Hattie looked into his dark eyes, the cold rain forgotten. In the heart of the wild, isolated from the cruel society that had cast her aside, she realized she was no longer a captive. She was exactly where she was meant to be. But their newfound peace was a fragile illusion. Down in the valley, the world they had left behind was about to violently intrude upon the sanctuary they were building. Josiah Miller had just discovered a terrifying truth. The old copper locket Hattie carried in her canvas sack, the one she had inherited from her mother, contained a hand-drawn map to a silver vein hidden deep in the Dragoon Mountains. And Josiah, fueled by greed and desperation, was assembling a posse to hunt the mountain man down and reclaim the daughter he had thrown away. Cole's cabin was a fortress of notched pine and river stone, tucked securely beneath the protective overhang of a granite cliff on the Mogollon Rim. For the first time in her 24 years, Hattie experienced what it meant to have a home rather than a prison. In the valley, her days had been measured by Josiah's drunken rages and the exhausting, thankless labor that kept them from starvation. Here, in the crisp, pine-scented air of the high country work, was a shared partnership. Cole never ordered her to cook or clean. They worked side by side. When they hunted, he taught her how to read the tracks of elk and mule deer in the damp earth. When they harvested wild onions and mountain berries, he listened to her voice, asking her questions about her thoughts, her fears and her dreams, things no one had ever cared to ask her before. The cabin had no mirrors, but Hattie found she no longer needed one. She saw her reflection in Cole's dark, unwavering eyes. Every evening, as the fire cast a golden glow across the rough-hewn floorboards, Cole would sit beside her. He would take her heavily calloused hands, the hands her father had mocked as man-hands, and press them gently to his lips. He traced the deep pox scars on her cheeks, not with pity or disgust, but with a quiet, profound reverence, as if they were the sacred markings of a battle-tested warrior. Under his gentle devotion, the heavy, suffocating shame Hattie had carried for a dozen years began to evaporate like morning mist. She was loved, completely, fiercely, and unconditionally. But as autumn began to paint the aspen leaves in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson, the shadows of the past began to stretch up the mountainside. One evening, while mending the heavy canvas sack she had brought from the valley, Hattie felt a hard lump in the lining. She pulled out the old copper locket that had belonged to her mother. It was rusted shut, but with a sharp hunting knife, Cole pried it open. Inside was not a portrait, but a tightly folded yellowed piece of parchment. It was a hand-drawn map. Cole studied the jagged lines and charcoal landmarks. "This is the Dragoon Range," he murmured, his brow furrowing. "This marks a vein of silver." a large one. The Apaches know of it, but it is considered bad medicine to take the metal from that mountain. Hattie's blood ran cold. She suddenly remembered her father frantically tearing apart their cabin the night before she was traded, raving about a lost opportunity. "He didn't just sell me for pelts," Hattie whispered, a sickening realization washing over her. "He thought the locket was still in the house. He sold me to get me out of the way so he could find it." Down in the sweltering valley, Josiah Miller had indeed discovered his fatal error. Realizing Hattie had taken her mother's belongings with her, Josiah went to Jedediah Wilkes, the ruthless land baron to whom he owed his life. Josiah traded the secret of the map for an armed escort. Wilkes, a man whose greed knew no bounds, immediately hired 3 hardened bounty hunters led by a vicious tracker named Boone. Heavily armed and driven by the promise of unfathomable wealth, the posse began the brutal ascent up the Mogollon Rim, following the faint trail left by Cole's massive roan gelding weeks prior. The storm broke on a frigid Tuesday morning. Cole was a mile away from the cabin, checking a line of snare traps, when the sharp crack of a dry branch echoed through the canyon. It wasn't an animal. It was the heavy, careless boot of a man who didn't belong in the mountains. At the cabin, Hattie was splitting firewood. The warning came too late. A rifle shot shattered the morning silence, the bullet splintering the chopping block inches from her hand. "Drop the axe, you ugly cow!" a harsh voice barked. Hattie spun around. Emerging from the tree line were Wilkes, the tracker, Boone, and her father, Josiah. Josiah looked worse than ever, his face flushed with whiskey and frantic greed. He held a Colt revolver pointed squarely at his own daughter's chest. "Where is it?" "Hattie," Josiah demanded, stepping into the clearing, his eyes darting nervously toward the tree line, terrified of the mountain man's return. "Give me the locket, and I'll tell Wilkes to let you live. You can stay up here with your savage." Hattie stood tall, her broad shoulders squared. The terrified, beaten girl who had left the valley was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by the wilderness and emboldened by love. "You have no daughter, Josiah," Hattie said, her voice steady and echoing with quiet fury. "And there is nothing in this cabin that belongs to you. Search the place," Wilkes ordered Boone, ignoring the family drama. "If the Apache shows his face, put a bullet in his gut." Boone lunged toward the cabin door, but he never made it. A high-velocity round from a heavy Sharps buffalo rifle tore through the morning mist, striking the tracker in the shoulder and spinning him violently into the dirt. The thunderous boom echoed off the canyon walls like the wrath of the mountain itself. "He's in the trees!" Wilkes screamed, drawing his own weapon and firing blindly into the dense pine forest. Cole moved like a ghost. He didn't fight like the gunmen in the valley. He fought like a son of the Chiricahua. He used the terrain, the shadows, and the fear of his enemies. Another shot rang out, shattering the cylinder of one of the bounty hunter's revolvers, sending shrapnel into the man's arm. The posse was thrown into pure chaos. Hattie didn't wait to be rescued. As her father turned his gun toward the tree line to fire at Cole, she grabbed the heavy iron splitting maul from the chopping block. With a guttural shout, she swung it, bringing the flat side of the heavy iron head hard against the back of Josiah's knees. Josiah howled in pain, his legs buckling beneath him. His revolver discharged into the dirt as he collapsed. Hattie scrambled forward, kicking the weapon far out of his reach. "You ungrateful wretch!" Josiah spat, clutching his shattered leg, his face twisted in venomous rage. Before he could strike her, the towering figure of Cole materialized from the smoke and missed. He had dropped his rifle and drawn a massive curve-bladed hunting knife. The remaining bounty hunters, seeing the sheer, terrifying size of the Apache mountain man and the cold, murderous intent in his dark eyes, broke and ran, abandoning Wilkes and Josiah to their fate. Wilkes cornered, and desperate, leveled his pistol at Cole's chest. "I'll kill you both," he roared, but Josiah, driven mad by the pain and the realization that Wilkes was going to get them all killed, made a final, fatal mistake. Desperate to save himself, Josiah pulled a hidden derringer from his boot and fired at Wilkes. The small bullet caught the land baron in the side. Wilkes gasped, stumbling backward, but instinctively squeezed the trigger of his own gun. The heavy slug caught Josiah squarely in the chest. Hattie's father fell back into the dirt, his eyes wide, staring up at the canopy of pine needles. He was dead before the echo of the gunshot faded. Wilkes, bleeding heavily, tried to cock his hammer again, but Cole was upon him. With a swift, brutal motion, the mountain man disarmed the land baron, knocking him unconscious with the heavy brass pommel of his knife. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the whistling of the high-altitude wind. Hattie stood over the body of the man who had tormented her for her entire life, the man who had sold her for a handful of animal skins. She felt no sorrow. She felt only the profound, cleansing weight of closure. Cole stepped beside her. His chest was heaving, his hands stained with powder and dirt, but his eyes were entirely focused on her. He reached out, pulling her tightly against his broad chest. Hattie buried her face in his buckskin jacket, inhaling the scent of pine wood smoke and the man who had saved her soul. "Are you hurt?" Cole whispered fiercely into her hair. "No," Hattie replied, wrapping her strong arms around him. "I am whole." Later that evening, as Wilkes was tied onto a horse to be sent back down the mountain to face the frontier law, Hattie and Cole sat before their stone fireplace. Hattie held the yellowed map in her hands. It represented immense wealth. It represented the ability to go anywhere, to buy anything, to live like a queen in the finest cities of the East. She looked at the map, and then she looked at Cole. He was watching her, waiting for her to decide their future, ready to follow her to the ends of the earth, if she asked it of him. Without a word, Hattie tossed the map into the roaring fire. Cole's eyebrows rose in surprise as the parchment curled, blackened, and burst into bright orange flames. "There is bad medicine in that silver," Hattie said softly, a gentle smile touching her scarred, beautiful face. She leaned against Cole's shoulder, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "Besides, I have already found the only treasure worth keeping." They remained in the high country, untouched by the greed and cruelty of the world below. Together the scarred woman and the solitary mountain man forged a legacy, not of silver or gold, but of an enduring, legendary love that the harsh winds of the Wild West could never wear away. If you were captivated by Hattie and Cole's wild frontier romance and their fight for survival, please hit that like button to let us know. Don't forget to share this story with fellow fans of Western drama and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life tales of untamed love and justice in the Wild West. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story.